Hello, my name is Kathy Falls, and I'm one of the non-scientists who work at LSU's College of the Coast and the Environment. Our team of 45 faculty are committed to delivering cutting-edge research and to preparing approximately 250 students each year for challenging careers related to the coast, rivers, and environment. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Nina Lamb, an Abraham Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies. Dr. Lamb has been with LSU since 1985. While most of the faculty in our college are in the physical sciences, Dr. Lamb is a social scientist and an expert in GIS and spatial science. We will be discussing Dr. Lamb's research on the reasons that businesses chose to reopen in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. Her paper, Predictors of Business Return in New Orleans After Hurricane Katrina, was published in 2009 and updated in 2012. It also served as the foundation for additional research about community resilience following national disasters. Dr. Lamb, it is a pleasure speaking with you today.
My pleasure too.
Taking a look at your qualifications, which are incredibly impressive, let me ask you specifically about your the research interest and about your use of the scientific approach. How does using a scientific approach improve your research?
I'm always interested in studying the interactions between human and environment. Especially on how I can develop and apply new methods to examine important societal problems, such as human health risk assessment and disaster resilience. So I use the scientific approach to study human environmental interactions so that my findings can be quantified, generalized, and used for other similar study areas. The quantifications is needed for estimations, for evaluating scenarios, and for simulations. So this is how science helps. However, I'd like to emphasize that we use a scientific approach does not mean that we do not take into considerations of other social cultural factors. We use a holistic approach that incorporate both natural factors and social cultural factors too.
Very impressive. I look at your paper and I think about Hurricane Katrina and I think about the impacts that were felt so far and wide and how 15 years later we're still dealing with some of the impacts. Tell me, what made you decide to research this particular topic and what did you hope to learn?
So when Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, although Baton Rouge did not get the direct hit, but many people flooded to Baton Rouge for temporary shelter, and we all felt the impact. I felt like my expertise in GIS, remote sensing, mapping, and human environmental interaction would be really, really helpful. And so when NSF had a call for proposal to study Hurricane Katrina, I felt like it is the duty of researchers, especially at LSU or in around the Louisiana region, that we need to study and do something to help understand the phenomenon. So I end up working with Professor Kelly Pace of finance, and also happened to connect with my former student, Richard Campanella, who was actually temporarily displaced from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. And we start a project on the business return under uncertainty. And we want to study how business make decisions and what kind of factors that make them come back or not come back.
I have to say, as a former economic developer, the topic is really of interest to me. So I'm really glad that you guys put forth a study. I see that you had several major findings from your article, some of which have been generalized on the screen. If you had to say which one surprised you the most or was the most unexpected, which major finding would it be?
So I can name two major ones, but basically the first one is the critical infrastructure protections. We survey the business owners at that time, and and this particular concern, critical infrastructure protection, including levees and utilities and telecommunications, all stood out to be the major concern. And although it's kind of people may expect, but in our study, I hear this just a general finding, but in our study, in our paper, we actually have a detailed quantification of that concern. How does the concern lead to the probability of opening or not opening? So, so that's the first major finding, but also we find that crime, which represent societal resilience, is also a concern that business turn to after they come back and try to open the business and try to do the business. And we found that this is kind of unexpected in most literature, and it means that we need to not only to look at the physical infrastructure, but also the social or societal infrastructure.
I could see where some of these findings would be of particular use with communities as they're thinking about planning, emergency planning, how all that would fall into place. So I'm sure that's one of the significant impacts that you identified that really goes beyond Hurricane Katrina to other natural disasters in different places. Talk to me for a second about these significant impacts and how they improve our understanding of business behavior.
So the research is a rare one because when we study the business decisions under uncertainty, there has been very little study that has the actual empirical data. So our study provide a rare but empirical picture of what happened, and so basically we find out from our studies, and I can just name two of them, is that when what it means is that from all these studies, what we mean is that individual or business should be encouraged to have a plan, and in this case, it's like to get some insurance. Now it could be insurance of many different types, but once you have this in place, the plan in place, it will help fund the disaster faster, disaster recovery faster, and provide the immediate aid, and then sort of maintain the locational values. So so that's the first significant implication from our study. And secondly, we also find out from our studies is that if you give a small amount of recovery aid to small business, the impact is much greater than to big, large business. And because of our model using, because the model find out what we call a nonlinear response. So, so I think these findings are useful, and in our paper, we actually have a model to describe about how the impact of changing one variable would affect the other variable too. So this these are very significant finding, and I in a way it has some implications, has some similarity to what is going on now with the COVID-19 pandemic.
So coming to, I can understand why the need for insurance to help, and then a little extra incentive on top of that to cover so many things that insurance doesn't cover. You talked about model and you talked about small a. Tell me how that model will help you figure out what the word small means to different people.
Okay, the model is actually a equation, a set of equations. And basically, if you input one variable, let's say if I input a foot of maybe $10, I don't know, I mean, maybe $1,000 to a business type, to one business type. And you can utilize the model to see what is the change of probability or increase of probability of opening. And so basically that's the model, you know, but it's not just one factor, because, you know, it has several variables within the set of equations. It is actually not very difficult to apply. So you know, it's always good. We actually use it to simulate the different scenarios from other studies too.
All right, that's very impressive. Thank you for explaining that for me. Let's talk about how this paper really has implications for other research. Now, you laid the groundwork. One of the things that came out of it is, I know you created a Ream Index, Resilience Inference Measurement Index. Tell me a little bit about your index and what makes it different from other resilience index that are out there.
So there are many research groups and organizations developing their own resilience or vulnerability indexes. So the development of the Ream, I call it Ream, the Resilience Inference Measurement Model, the Ream Index, actually has been supported by a number of research grants, including from NSF, USDA, USGS, and NOAA. So the main characteristic of the Ream Index is that we use empirical data, such as damage from the disaster and population return, which describe the recovery, to verify the indexes. And the concept is very new, and the framework can be universally applied with some local data and local needs. The index, I would say the index is still being improved and tested for different study areas. And, but we have applied and tested the index to hurricanes, disasters, hurricanes along the Gulf Coast, in the Mississippi River Delta, and also the Caribbean countries. And we also apply the index, the framework, to the drought resilience in the southwestern United States, and also the earthquakes in China, and also the flood insurance in the Netherlands. So, so we've been testing and refining it, and in fact, we have a plan of trying to test the resilience model for the COVID-19 pandemic.
That is very impressive. It's nice to know that your research is being used around the world. So thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. I enjoyed it so very much, learned an awful lot about your research. So thank you, Dr. Lam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.